to Innsmouth, stranger.
I also do a podcast with Paul Fricker called Mason and Fricker's Eldritch Stories. You can find us on all sorts of social media if you want to hear that. But we're here today and we've got an exclusive and illustrious panel of speakers who are now going to introduce themselves, starting at that end.
Hey. Hi, I'm Tom Campbell. I am a writer and creative producer for Deadbolt Media and Bone Idol Comics.
Rah!
That set the watermark very high. Hi, I'm Helena Nash. I'm a freelance TTRPG writer for such games as Ben Aronowicz's Rivers of London, and I occasionally write for other things such as the Scarred for Life books about the trauma of growing up in the 80s as a kid.
Hello there, I'm the obligatory odd one out. I do not have a name here, but I do have one really. I'm Matthew Sanderson. I'm a freelance writer for various role-playing games, normally those that involve tentacles and the machinations of the great old ones, but also worked on other games like Cult and Vampire the Masquerade. Also one of the co-hosts on the Good Friends of Jackson Lies podcast, where we also have a very tentacular leaning.
I'm Paul Roland. I'm the author of The Curious Case of H.P. Lovecraft, one of the biographies that went under the water. Nobody knew about it, but I talked about it earlier. I think only about a few of you were here, but that was a very pleasant experience. And I'm also a recording artist who draws on Lovecraft quite a bit for inspiration. I did the Reanimator album, if that means anything to anybody.
Hi, I'm Zoe Burgess. I'm an author and artist of queer cosmic horror and monster erotica. I do the Monster in Your Bed podcast. I also research anime, particularly hentai.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to post some questions and hopefully you have some answers. That's how it works, yeah? So, can I ask the obvious question first? Do you want to kick off, Zoe? Does weird fiction work off the page?
I mean, yes. I mean, okay, so my world is like mostly anime and manga. And a lot of the like Lovecraftian translations, particularly some of the recent ones, like Summer Hikaru Died, and Necronomicon, and the Great Old Ones TV show, very long title, some of these things, are using the lore to kind of create it within that kind of like more Japanese context and like entertainment, but also mixing it with traditional Japanese folklore to create some really like wild and interesting stories, and also a lot of like the Lovecraftian themes appear in hentai quite a bit, which if anyone's ever taught to me is kind of like my whole jam, and like seeing like weird fiction displayed erotically by using eldritch horrors as the inspiration for sexual romps has been very entertaining and working wonderfully well within like Japanese media.
I'd say no, to be honest. Lovecraft is very underrepresented in film, particularly. I mean, until CGI, I think they just felt that it was, unfilmable, his creations. So you had The Haunted Palace marketed as a Poe film, and you had Die Monster Die. Probably less than a handful until the Reanimator was made. The only real media that really captures the essence and the quality of his writing, I would say, I don't want to use the word comic books, but illustrations, something of the standard of Bernie Wrightson, I would say, is about the only thing that really brings his creatures to life. So I think he's simply unrealizable, except in your mind. That's why his fiction, I think, has had such a profound hold on us, because it's only in our imaginations that we can really, give his language the images that they deserve.
To put myself between the two of you, I'd say yes, but probably slightly leaning more towards Paul there. That I believe weird fiction works best on the page, but it's not to say that it can't translate into other mediums, but it doesn't do it as well. I think part of the beauty of weird fiction on the page is that it has to pass through a personal filter. It has to pass through your mind's eye and your imagination of how you try to understand what's been put on the page in front of you. So you can have wonderful set-piece images on the screen, but that's almost a definitive image of what it is. There are a few things you can use to play around with that I'm sure we'll probably get into later, but it becomes a lot more set in stone. It becomes a definitive this type of image that you see, rather than what your imagination does to fill in the blanks. It's not as woolly and it's not as undefined anymore, but as I say, that's why I plot myself in somewhere in the middle, but probably slightly towards more Paul's end of the yes or no spectrum.
Yeah, do we have to rearrange the seats now? Actually, that works. I think your weird fiction may vary, and for a start, I'm not entirely sure we'd all ever agree on what weird fiction is, but I'm going to start by saying, let's start with Lovecraft, right? So for me, I think it works audio perfectly. Very happy with audio. Obviously, a bunch of us probably heard Dark Adventures Radio Theatre by the HPL Historical Society, but for me, as a kid in the 80s, I had one of these. You can't read it. It's The Thing on the Doorstep, narrated by the American actor David Healy. Oh, perfect, right? I think the written word translates to audio perfectly. Of course it would. Films, they're different. They're a different beast by the time once you get pictures. But yeah, comics, I'm very happy with either. Basically, any of Alan Moore's incredibly deep dives into weird fiction, like Swamp Thing, but also Providence, which is his opus to Lovecraft's work. So yeah, for me, and it's only for me. Audio, yes. Comics, yes. Films, I think that's probably a Lovecraftian word there. Tom?
So I feel personally attacked because I obviously make film, so that's great. Does Lovecraft work in film? No, there's never been a decent Lovecraft adaptation at all. I've not seen. There's been passing ones that are quite interesting, but they never quite capture the mark.
What's an interesting one? Give me a near miss.
A Lovecraft adaptation. I thought Dagon was all right.
Right, the correct answer.
Yeah. It was this close to being good, but it still was a bit, it was an interesting one. But I do think it does have, like weird fiction, certainly recently there's been a lot more films that are sort of embracing weird fiction as a basic. Like certainly cosmic horror. There's a lot more film now that are trying to, sort of on that cusp of being really good cosmic horror. But yeah, I think it does work. I think you can certainly, people are getting more and more experimental with film, which is really nice. Well, people have always been experimental with film, but certainly in horror, there's a new, you've got, with companies like A24, there's this whole elevated horror now, rather than, your typical teen slashers and all that side of things. There is some really interesting stuff. I think, comics, absolutely. Anything by Alan Moore is brilliant. Grant Morrison, as The Nameless, brilliant. Cosmic horror, weird as hell. I think comics are really good place to get very strange and weird with things. It's a nice mashup of, written word and film. It's a visual, but you still read it and you can still play around with the imagery and stuff on there. I'm going to pass this back over.
Matt, I might have had a bit of a block when you answered. Did you actually mention role-playing?
No.
Okay, so I'm going to add one in, yeah? Because I think role-playing works very well as another media for exploring weird fiction and Lovecraftiana, because it's like the written word and it's like audio, and it leaves a lot to your imagination, which is, I believe, the things you were saying work well off the page and so forth. So I think role-playing actually is a good fit, as well as the other things our panellists have said, to just add that one in, obviously, from me. But, okay, so, what was I going to say? I was going to ask, with weird fiction, why is it hard to make it work in other media? I mean, you've obviously just talked about films, and you've given all the reasons of why it works in a particular other media. But why is it difficult? Why doesn't it translate well? What is the core of weird fiction in that sense? Why?
Trying to film the unfathomable. If it's unfathomable and you can't explain it or visualize it, how are you meant to visualize it? I mean, there's a manga and anime series called The Summer Hikaru Died, which is a mixture of folklore and cosmic horror. And the way they have visualised the unfathomable streaming entity of consciousness and unknowable is one of the best takes I've seen in it. In the manga, it's drawn beautifully because you're not entirely sure what this thing is. There's something from somewhere that's taken over, and it's just this unfathomable shifting mass of colour and texture. And that's one of the best translations I've seen of kind of this weird unknowable, especially for a cosmic horror. But yeah, I find it works best in films when you don't see anything. I'm a great fan of The Endless, which has all that essence of madness and cult status and this unknowable god, and yet you never actually see the thing. You just kind of see the interaction of people with the unknown.
I think the core or the principle of weird fiction is that it's a skewed perception either of the real world by a person with, who's out of their gourd, if you like, or a quote normal person in a skewed world, and you can't translate that very readily, maybe with CGI now, because it's a psychological state of mind. I think that's what is weird at the core of weird fiction. That's why it translates so well. That's why it works so well on the written page, because everybody can dream or visualize to their heart's content anything if the groundwork and the description is very very. It's not. In fact, it's not detailed. That's the great thing about Lovecraft. He doesn't describe. In fact, that's one of the criticisms of him, isn't it? That he doesn't describe these things. He just talks about them nameless and terrible and horrible and all this. He gives you the feeling that they evoke when you perceive them. But so he's really taking the point of view of the character who is helpless against this incredible otherworldly thing that's erupted into our own world and is disrupting it. As I said before, if you were here, it's really a projection of the savage, primal beast inside us, which is what he was so afraid of, which is why he was so against foreigners, as he called them in the horror and so on. So I think the core of weird fiction, quite distinct from fantasy or horror, is a psychological disruption of reality, if you like, and that's why it's so difficult, if not impossible, to translate, particularly into film. But I think illustrations and, as you said, audio, obviously, is probably about the only means. I think it'll never be any different than this. That's why we keep reading Lovecraft, because he's the only way to get into this other reality.
Scott, when I tried to think about how I would answer this question, I went back to thinking, when was the last time, or any time really, that I've said the phrase, well, that was weird? Why did I say that? It's because I've been confronted with something that is uncertain or unexplained, or frankly, WTF. That it's something that you've got an outline, but you haven't got the whole picture. That requires that part of that, as mentioned in my previous answer, something about having that internal filter that you can use to fill in the gaps. That it's something that in other media like visual, you've got that whole picture presented in front of you. There isn't any room for ambiguity in a vast amount of cases. I think that's probably why a lot of the Lovecraft adaptations fail. But there are plenty of examples in film where you can get that to work. I think pretty much you turn on a David Lynch film, watching some of the weird montages from the likes of either Lost Highway or Inland Empire, for example. There's a whole load that you could quote from him, that he's probably the master of doing that. Close behind him, I'd say David Cronenberg with something like Videodrome. Because for those of you who haven't seen a very old film and want to avoid spoilers, plug your fingers in your ears. Towards the end of the film, where the main character pretty much puts the gun to his head and pulls the trigger, and then that's it, that's the film done. What happens, we don't know after that screen goes blank, but you can infer and then come up with your own answers, and I think that's where the page excels at. It gets you to bring that that personal touch to fill in those gaps. But yeah, unfortunately, few filmmakers seem to be able to bring that to the screen. But on those rare occasions, we get folks that can. Say, R.I.P. David Lynch.
There's a sketch show called Libby's Show, Scottish comedian. Bear with me. A couple of these sketches that went viral. One of them is a guy who goes in. I think he's gone into the council offices to complain that there's an unspeakable, indescribable thing in the basement. He said, "Can you describe it, sir?" "No, I can't describe it. It's an unspeakable, indescribable thing." Apologies for the Scottish accent. And I think that kind of sums up one of the problems, particularly if we're literally going for the Lovecraftian, the indescribable thing. It's indescribable, right? I've been thinking about the films the film and TV where it does work. It's the ones where it just glances off the unknowable. Lynch, bits of Fire Walk with Me. I'm going to make a little shout out for towards the end of Prince of Darkness, which is John Carpenter one. There's some weird shit going on, and he kind of explains it. The bit as the credits are going on, or at the end, is spine tingling, and I love it because it's weird. I remember when True Detective came out, and collectively lost our minds because they vaguely mentioned King in Yellow. And it's like, hey, you can't really screw it up if you just vaguely mention King in Yellow and you vaguely talk about Carcosa. Anytime anyone's gone any further than that, I think you risk it looking silly. And, I kind of like Stuart Gordon stuff. I guess we'll get on to that at some other point, but it's a different genre. It's day-glow body horror stuff, which is fine, but I think it's a different genre.
So I completely agree with pretty much what everyone said. It's really, I don't really have much to add. I think it's a difficult one to translate, certainly into a visual medium, because it's what's not there really. How can you sort of show? And as soon as you start showing stuff, it's not scary really at all. But no, sorry, I just fully agree with what you guys do.
Keep the microphone down there.
Oh yeah, okay.
We'll change it up a bit.
Oh no, don't start with me.
Because we haven't actually mentioned video games. Now, I don't play a lot of the AAA mainstream ones, but a couple of ones that I've really liked are things like Dredge, Slay the Princess, kind of slightly the more the quirky indie ones, and Still Wakes the Deep. Again, and it's the human cost where the horror and the so there is something weird going on. It's either corrupting, it's either it's just horrific, but it's barely seen. But in these games, it's about breakdown of the human condition. People are going mad, people are kind of either mutating or not understanding the situation or just trying to survive. And I think playing through as a person trying to survive something you can't quite understand what's going on, and yet you're seeing everyone else around you kind of slowly going mad or breaking down, and you're slowly starting to glitch within the game. So I think video games, the ones that are done well, can kind of incorporate that one, because you're the person in the story kind of going, did I just see that? Did I not just see that? Why is this fisherman suddenly bleeding from the eyes? It's just I think the video game industry, when done well, especially in the indie scene, are kind of producing really interesting stuff.
Sorry, have you ever played Signalis?
No.
It's amazing, play it.
Okay,
It does it
the
really
list.
well. Yeah.
Another vote for Dredge.
I
awesome.
love Dredge.
Awesome.
Thanks for that. I was going to just add, we haven't discussed fine art. Is the scream weird or is it horror? Just to think about. We also haven't really talked about music. We talked about audio, as in, vocalization and dramatization. But what about music? Can music be weird? Things if you want to chip in at any point on those. But my actual question, particularly starting down that end, is if we're talking, and you guys have talked a lot about film and a bit about TV, yeah? So clearly our media is sort of writ large on our faces here that, we talk about TV and film a lot. So can TV and film actually ever be weird, especially when a modern audience wants clarity and explanation and things neatly wrapped up at the end, allegedly? So can you actually ever make a truly weird piece of mainstream TV or cinema?
Yeah, I think you absolutely can. I totally get where people want clarity on everything. It's something that we're constantly fighting with. Constantly, it's well, I write a film script and someone's like, well, do you want to describe, or can you, what is this? It's like, I don't want to say. I don't want to say. I want to leave it up to the audience to actually think. I think one of the most mainstream, ever of it is Alien. The first one doesn't really describe anything about the alien, like where it's come from or anything like that. It's only progressively over time they've really diluted it. But yeah, no, I can't even remember what the question was now. My brain's gone.
I mean, you said yes, you can.
Yeah.
You can make a weird product,
Yeah.
even though a mainstream audience, in theory, demands a resolution.
Yeah, I think you can absolutely do something mainstream and leave it up to the audience. I think far too often we treat audiences like idiots in film. I've had loads of people say, what was behind that film? So I just take it. Nothing, doesn't matter. Just enjoy the thing, think about it yourself. I'm not going to, explain what the story's about.
In other panelists, obviously, if you want to talk about TV and film, please do. But if you want to apply that question to your thing, such as games and so forth, feel free.
Yeah, that's it.
I'll rapidly recalibrate. But no, I am going to talk about film and TV for a little bit. Then I'll talk about other things. Because I think that franchises and serials and episodes are the enemy of weird. Really hard to be weird when you've got 26 episodes. Sometimes it's great at the beginning until they keep telling you stuff about it, like show my age, when you start to hear about Zahadum in Babylon 5, right? It's great. Alien's great, and then what we're like 13 and a half movies down, and I think we know the aliens' ovulation cycle and calorific intake on a daily basis. So those are they've got to be, right? That's obviously going to be the enemy of weird, the more you find out. Weird stuff on TV? Yes, David Lynch, definitely. Twin Peaks The Return did my head in. There's at least 2 black and white episodes that I just gotta wait, and all that's awesomely crazy. I am one of those people who wants to understand, but that's me.
Knocking back to things like in the 70s, the changes.
Yep. I mean, things where you don't know what's going on. I think, the longer it goes on. The weirdest thing I saw on TV was a late-night Chris Morris sketch show called Jam. There's an incident with Mark Heap. He's some kind of plumber who comes to deal with lizards in a woman's room. And Chris Morris, if I remember this right, there were 2 versions of the show.
Yes.
The Blue Jam,
Blue
right?
Jam and Jam.
And it was even more trippy. You've come home from a club, and I am something of an ascetic, but I felt like I had done some serious shit when I was watching it, and he literally distorted the music and played around. Okay. Gaming, tabletop gaming. I think the problem is that mechanics and systems totally will always break you out of a little bit of what you're doing in a way that an audio and a TV show won't, because you're literally also thinking, I really need to make this roll. Or I've got an elephant rifle, but what's the range on it? Am I going to hit the dole? I don't know.
The answer is no.
Right. So I think there is an obstacle there which good games and good refs can overcome, but I think there is always going to be an obstacle that you are partly, if you like, driving the ship whilst immersing yourself in whatever the situation is. That's where it will always struggle, I think.
Brief interlude away from gaming, because I've got a couple of points to say there. But as music and art were mentioned, I think art, there's a couple of instances I can think of where that weird atmosphere is definitely evoked really well. And the first one being the works of M.C. Escher, where you've got impossible images with either false perspectives, thinking of things like metamorphosis, relativity, reptiles, house of stairs, waterfall, all these wonderful images that very much mathematically based, but you kind of look at them and think, my brain hurts after a little while trying to work out how that water can't go that way. And then the likes of Dali and the contemporary surrealists. I mean, who doesn't like a good melting clock?
While we're talking about art, do you think magic eye images are weird fiction in video form?
I find it weird.
Form?
I find it weird that I used to be able to get them to work, and then my eyesight just now says no. So definitely a young person's game there. But away from visual art, I think music definitely has a few moments where this again weird feeling can crop up. I mean, take a look at the lyrics for any Blue Oyster Cult song, particularly the likes of Astronomy. I mean, you tell me what the hell the Four Winds Bar is. And again, some of the early Genesis stuff, which I think you could also filter through to the point of your question there about how can it be mainstream and work. And I think they're a very good example of how maybe it can't, because when they sold out to become more poppy rock, it didn't have anywhere near the same level of weirdness. When you take something like Supper's the lyrics in Madman Moon and then compare them against something like, I don't know, Jesus He Loves Me, that, yeah, there's something weird got missed along the way and it became a very, very lesser being as a result, I think. But in game, so rather than have two gaming segments back to back, one of the things I think works as the best type of GM or keeper, insert your various adjective here, inspiration or material in books that you can then use to base your own stories off, is where it inspires your imagination because it doesn't give you all those answers. I'm thinking things like straying away from Lovecraft media, maybe to the likes of Dark Heresy, where you have the Halo devices. You have these devices that are found on the edge of the universe that start doing things to you, things that are very quantifiable, but the reason why, that's left completely up to you to say, what were these things left behind? Was there a purpose? Is it just how it interacts with human biology? Or things like the Murder Room, which is same kind of vein as the Empty Room, for those of you that have played any of the the new World of Darkness or Chronicles of Darkness material. Just this extra spatial thing that just happens to, you wander into it by accident and bad stuff happens to you. That you can see visually how you also can describe this to your players, but the motivations behind this and the rationale and explanation for that, it may not even be written on the page for you as the GM, but if you can bring your own explanation to it, if it works internally for you, perfect. Your players, they're going to come up with something completely different, and I think that's where some of the best gaming material shines, is where it has that multiple layers of interpretation and gets you to do a bit of the work rather than just be force-fed all the stuff.
I think we need to make a very honourable mention for Night Gallery, Serling's colour series, which adapted Pickman's model, if I remember rightly, and Cool Air reasonably well, considering the resources they had and technicality of the time. There was also an episode, Professor Somebody or Other's lecture, I can't remember what the title was called, Peabody, thank you, in which he was evoking the unmentionable in case it came through. I think it does come through at the end. So that was one case where TV actually got it right, I think, but otherwise it hasn't. What I'd like to say about music is you can't, I think, this might sound sacrilege, but bands like Black Sabbath with Behind the Wall of Sleep, Metallica with Call of Cthulhu, didn't even spell it right. I mean, I know that was intentional, but still. They didn't even, I don't think they had any lyrics in that. I think it was an instrumental. Bands, particularly heavy metal bands, and speed metal bands, they tend to think that simply uttering a few chosen phrases will evoke Lovecraft's world. For me, it doesn't. I worked hard on my Reanimator album to capture the quality of his writing. I read that story and others many times over and took key phrases out, because I think if I used my own prosaic language, you'd have a cartoon, which I think is what a lot of heavy metal bands produce, as much as I love heavy metal. If you're going to do Lovecraft, he deserves an appreciation of his special qualities, his language. And the other thing is, you cannot conjure these eldritch, nameless other beings with major and minor chords, which is all that they know. If you want to conjure the quality or evoke the world of Lovecraft and its inhabitants, you have to have disorientating music. Now, you can't do that with dissonance the whole way through, because nobody will listen to it unless they're into Ligeti or some, Schoenberg or something. But if you want to capture the popular metal crew or pop music, rock people, you have to insert certain slightly weird chords if you want to create a weird world. So when I didn't do it on the Reanimator album, but when I did an M.R. James album called Warning to the Curious, I actually bothered to learn diminished 11ths and all the rest of it, and I sprinkled them in there, maybe in little inserts, not in the the actual song, but between, or I added the odd chord, because then you're creating this disturbance, you're creating this unease, which is what Lovecraft is all about. He's shaking the stability and making you insecure, because that's what his characters are feeling. So if you want to get that into another medium like music, you cannot use conventional, safe, nursery rhyme kind of music that resolves itself. You have, and very few of these bands, I can't think of any of them actually, have done that. So that's my tuppence worth. I think actually classical music would do it very well if a modern classical composer chose to write, a Necronomicon symphony or what have you, because they would have the language to get that unsettling feeling. But isn't that what you feel when you read Lovecraft? It's not it's not Dickens or something where it's all very safe, but there's colourful, larger-than-life characters. It's an unsettling world, a world in which, as I said before, your perception is distorted. If you're having empathy with the character.
I find with like cosmic horror and Lovecraftian, it works better when I don't have straight answers. I don't want mainstream media to like explain everything to me. Some of my favourite like films are things like Possession, Untamed, The Beach House, where you don't really know where the thing has come from or what's going on. It's the peril and the madness happening to humanity. And it's the same for manga, which I absolutely adore. And you have greats like Junji Ito, which will craft phenomenally strange worlds, but never really truly say like why this is all going on, as opposed to sometimes you'll have like, it's like Lovecraft in name rather than in essence. Like I remember when Sabrina the Teenage Witch came out and they were like, aha, Lovecraftian lore is now in there and characters are in it, and it didn't feel right, as opposed to like things like Possession, where you could see that there was inspiration with the cosmic horror, but you have no fudging clue kind of like what's going on, where the thing came from, what the ending truly means. You could write essays about the meaning behind that movie. And there's great manga like After God, in which they're not really telling you why or where, like gods have turned up. They're just playing games of humanity. There is no empathy and understanding, and humans are just caught in this weird crossfire of the gods are unfathomable, beautiful. You look at them and you disappear into air, so you can't actually look at them, so you can't really draw or describe them. You just can have like them represented by what people think the most perfect, beautiful, evil god would look like, because any character that looks at them just gets like flipped out of existence. So yeah, I don't want it to be too mainstream and too like, here are all the answers. I want weird worlds giving me like how I can interpret it. What do I feel like is going on in this situation?
Okay, so can I kind of pull that a little apart and sort of set a question based on what you just said to some degree? So if I was I'm the cook, yeah? And I've come out to you guys and I'm asking, what's the recipe for weird? Yeah. So what's the number one thing for each of you that makes it weird? And maybe what's a secondary, optional one perhaps for you? And obviously each of you may be quite different in terms of what the answer may be, but I'm quite interested to go, what's the recipe for weird in whatever media we choose to then represent it? What's the heart of it? How do we kind of workshop it to get it right?
I mean, I quite like to be unsettled. I want to watch something where I really don't know what's going on or how I'm feeling about it. I want that creeping sense of dread, like this thing doesn't understand me and I'm not going to understand it.
Cool.
I think disorientation would be the main thing, where you don't know where you are or what's happening or why it's happening, and you're just driven to the edge of sanity, which I think is the core of Lovecraft's fiction.
I think 2.5 stone of the unexplained and maybe 1.5 pints of uncertainty. That it has to be something that, again, you have to bring your own interpretation to it. Without that, it's just not weird for me. And also crazy measurements as well.
I'm going to mention Robert E. Howard here as an example of somebody who did a lot of weird fiction and was probably actually my gateway rather than Lovecraft. Red Nails is a great example. I think it's a good adventure romp. But there's a lot of weird in there. They encounter a thing that comes up the stairs. You don't even see it, but you kind of see it later on. It's dead behind a divan. Spoiler. But yeah, it's unknown, but you kind of get hints of stuff. That's what I like. And if I was going to be silly, I'd say creatures with TH in their names, which is most of them. Big comics fan, Doctor Strange, Hori Hosa Hogoth. I've got here an old Doctor Strange comic from the 70s. It was my first encounter with Lovecraft, which I didn't know for another 10, 15 years, because there's a writer called Gardner Fox who was really into Lovecraft. So he filed off the serial numbers, and Doctor Strange goes to a sleepy New England town called Starksborough, and they're all a bit reptilian, and he meets a thing called the Sliggers and a thing called Nugabthoth. And there's a lot of that going on. But yeah, anyway, thank you, Gardner Fox, for scaring me at 6 years old.
Yeah, I think it's just, if I was being unsettled, I think, yeah, just having that visceral reaction, something that's really kind of, yeah, that I'm trying to think of a way of putting it that's different, but no, it is completely just being absolutely unsettled is how I would do anything. If I come away and I'm like completely comfortable with my reality after watching or reading something, then I'm a bit like, yeah. As soon as it starts making me question my actual life, and you know, the whole existentialness of it all, that's brilliant. I want to be unsettled.
So we're being unsettled. We're kind of getting hints of something. We've got some thought in the names and so forth. And how do we make something unsettling? You know, you're all creators here, so I'm going to pose it the question: how do you make your audience, however that may, whatever media you're working in, how do you make them unsettled? We're all ready to write down the answer here.
I mean, if I write, I make it erotic, because there's nothing weirder than being slightly turned on by something you don't think you should be turned on by.
And that's a really good answer.
I think it's confronting expectations, so that whatever the reader and the protagonist expect, it has to be something else. So they're always thrown. That probably guarantees you publishing, because that's what they're looking for, something where you're always constantly being challenged and thwarted. But in the case of weird fiction, it would have to be by something that is just illogical or irrational.
But I think drawing on personal experience can also help here, because it's where you can craft fiction surrounded by a good degree of reality, and how you can make it real on the page can definitely help. Well, I say page insert various methods of media here. But for example, one thing I've been through, I've suffered some very bad bouts of delirium while I was in a prolonged hospital stay, and that's informed one of the scenarios I've written. Because there's nothing that really can scare you about how your brain can really mess you up. And drawing on what Paul said, what Lovecraft does was conveying that method of that mental deterioration and breakdown. There's nothing more terrifying than what your own brain can do to you. And if you can bring some of those experiences, if they're in that same kind of ballpark, to whatever art or game you want to create, make it feel real, and it has an impact.
Yeah, from a gaming point of view, writing a game, hit them with something weird, resist the temptation to explain it or reveal it at the end, make sure they don't feel safe in some way. If that means personal peril, then do it. I found I always end up putting body horror in, and I keep getting told off by my editor for doing that. But those are the sort of things that affected me. I realised, oh my God, I suppose it's adjacent to tentacular erotica, or possibly the flip side, but my word, there's a lot of body horror in the things that I might suggest as weird fiction. I think you mentioned the thing down there, but yeah, all of that. And destroy their trust. Have them betrayed by someone that they really trust in a game. Do that. And you say, yeah, I'm not sure if it's a fun experience, but that's how I would do it. How I do it.
again, there's not really much more to add. I think everyone's pretty much outlined it really, really well. Certainly, I think to unsettle someone, you really have to challenge them, and again, challenge their views on reality and existence. And I think that's what being unsettled is. It's when something's been thrust in your face and you're like, that's unsettling. And like body horror. Exactly, is I can't add anything more.
We need to move the chairs around so give you more of a chance, right?
Well, you start the next
You
one.
can say you can. I mean, as you were just talking, immediately what came into my head was The Substance. Have you all seen The Substance?
Yeah.
No? Okay. Well, without getting into spoilers, but yeah, there's a whole. If you like body horror, then that is clearly the film. This this year to go and see. But anyway, we've got about 5 minutes left. I'm conscious I've not really asked the audience, because the audience no doubt have got a million questions you're all eager to ask the panel. I can see you all gearing up now. Do we have any questions? Raise your hand. Thank you. Yes.
Would you say that the very old TV series The Outer Limits managed to create a sense of weirdness?
Well, there you go. I nodded vociferously.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Very quickly. My dad used to tell us a story, and I didn't know it's from Outer Limits, which is often the way you grow up, right? And a friend of the family used to tell us stories that I thought was real, and it was from an old 40s horror series called Lights Out. Anyway, that's a different story. My dad would tell us a story about an old lady who was being terrorised by little creatures around the house. And there's a great twist at the end, which I won't say, but that's, I think, second season, Twilight Zone. I can't remember if it's called The Invaders or The Visitors or something. The old lady, can she even speak? I can't remember, she's almost mute. But it's great because, yes, there is an explanation at the end because, hey, it's Twilight Zone. But yeah, I think it totally...
She was played by Agnes Moorehead.
Agnes Moorehead, thank you. Yes, well, Endora from Bewitched.
Well, Citizen Kane.
Oh, yeah, but mainly Bewitched, right? Sorry, right. Anybody else got a Twilight?
Yeah, there's one example of The Outer Limits I can think of. The revival series, the one that was done in the 90s rather than the earlier ones. That it's all about playing with perception. That there's a lady who's, again, dating the series dramatically, is in her car on her phone, this great big brick that she's holding up to her ear, and she accidentally filters into a conversation on someone else's phone in the next car over. And it turns out he's an alien and he's on a mission doing something that makes it look like he's basically murdering these whole load of people. And she, as the investigative reporter, is trying to get to the bottom of what this alien is doing. But it turns out that she is actually just adding to the problem because she's seeing things through her frame of perspective. But it all flips it on its head by the end of the episode. And I think that's a great example of weird fiction, is just that pulling the rug out from under you, and your whole frame of reference for how you view the rest of the episode changes in just a few minutes. Is great.
I would disagree, to be honest. I think the Outer Limits was strictly a science fiction show. That's how it was conceived, and it was known as the Monster of the Week. I don't think in any of the episodes that I remember, it strayed into the territory of weird fiction. It was very straightforward, and a twist at the end. I would say
Twilight Zone was more weird.
Yeah, well, Twilight Zone was again about perceptions. Like you had the guy, is anybody there? And it turns out he was in an isolated booth, training to be an astronaut or something. So again. And then the guy who at Last Stop at Willoughby, I think it was called, who gets off in what they call you assume is a fantasy or a dream city, an ideal town, I should say, Midwestern town, and presumably he's just died. So I think that's more fantasy. And I don't think either of those two series touched on weird fiction, but I think Night Gallery did, but it had to go to Lovecraft to do so.
Okay, we've got very limited time, so I'm going to ask you for a 1 to 2 word answer for each of the panel, yeah? So the audience are going to go away from here with a kind of recipe for being unsettled, because you've given them that, yeah? But they need an example, yeah? And I know we've quoted lots of examples, but for each of you, what's the number one example you want the audience to go away and watch or listen to or do whatever tonight, yeah, to get a full weird on?
Possession.
Yeah.
Thing on the doorstep.
Anything by Robert Aikman.
I'm going to be a bit controversial here and say something that we all think of as a ghost story, and that's M.R. James's Come Whistle, especially the black and white one with Michael Hordern in the 60s. Now, we all know it's simply a ghost story, but the fact is it's so unsettling, so disconcerting, and because it doesn't appear as a ghost, it appears as a sheet. I think the atmosphere, the sense of unease that he conjures up, and that they've captured in that particular film, helped by it being in monochrome, I think would certainly qualify.
I would agree.
The summer Hikaru died, either the manga, the novel, or the anime.
Thank you. And one last thing for the panel, okay? Where can people find out more about you as we quickly run back down the panel? How can they follow you and find your work?
I mean, come and find me on the table over there. I can give you a business card.
I've got a Bandcamp site under my name, lots of interesting Lovecraftian and horror type music.
It'd be the podcast of the good friends of Jackson Elias for me, so over at blasphemoustomes.com.
You can find me on Facebook.
You can find me down the pub over there, and we're also showing some of our shorts tonight, so yeah, come see.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks for everyone coming. Join me in thanking our panel. Thank you very much.